Chapter 3 Corn Husk Dolls. Tonight, dear reader, I'll tell you the story of a boy and a persistent dream. Ashley knew by the knock who was at her door. The wind groaned outside, and the late hour made but it could only be one person. Tucker? The door opened to reveal a boy with chestnut hair and a pale face. Ashley smiled small and spoke again. The same dream? Yeah, Tucker responded. He closed the door behind him, and Ashley patted the empty space next to her on the bed, putting her book down. The only fireplace in the room burned an oiled yellow glow, creating large shadows across decrepit walls. The young boy made his way to her with ease, a practice action. He nestled his feet into the warm covers, and Ashley turned to him. This has been going on for weeks, Tuck. To which the boy twiddled his thumbs. I know. Ashley shrugged, and her words came out a little more brazenly than she meant them to. Well, you can't just come here every time. She had no problem consoling her younger brother, but there was a limit to how much she could do. After all, the bad dreams were his, not hers. It's not if she could dispel them. I know, I just think Mom and Dad are going to take me to the doctor if I tell them, Tucker replied. The glass panes of her window shuddered from the force of the fall weather outside. It was always cold in the house. The heating system was old, and it sputtered out heat sporadically, never enough to warm someone truly. Ashley shivered and pulled the blankets over her and Tucker's shoulder. I swear the doctor would be nice to you, Tucker, she said, as if she questioned the sentiment herself. The blankets were as heavy as wool, and Ashley felt as if her words didn't do much to quell Tucker's worries. The next night it happened again, and again. By the time the frost was starting to bloom at the base of the glass windows in Ashley's room, Tucker didn't seem to sleep through the nights at all anymore. The rim of darkness under his naive brown eyes grew as solid as a shadow. This night was no different, or at least that's what Ashley had thought. The boy had something in his hands as he stood at the open doorway. A little doll. It sent immediate shivers down Ashley's spine. She tilted her head as he crossed the threshold and walked in, the floorboards creaking. Tucker, what is that? She asked. He came to her bed, and Ashley found herself staring at it. The doll. Mom made it for me. She said it keeps bad dreams away, he replied, his voice quiet and cold. So he had told Mom. It was a putrid thing, Ashley thought. Why had their mom made something like that? A little girl with a bonnet and a skirt, all composed of some tan-colored material. It had no face, but it was like its visage was burning itself into Ashley's mind. What's it made of? The husk from this year's harvest. He held on with tightness, his small hand squeezing the thing, like if he didn't, something terrible would happen. Ashley's voice felt meek and shallow, suddenly, even if she tried to reassure herself that everything was fine. She was safe in her bed. A corn husk doll. You're lying, she said, as he came closer, and she scooted further away into her bed. Mom didn't make that. Tucker didn't say anything and climbed into the bed. Ashley felt as if she would throw up. The doll, it was looking at her. She knew it had to be looking at her. The husk had long since dried out, looked awful sharp at the ends, and that face, it had no face. Get out, Ashley whispered, tears springing at her eyelids. Tucker looked up, eyes wide. What? I said leave, Tucker. Leave my room right now or I'll call Mom and Dad. He left wordlessly, disappointed at her sudden anger. As the freezing wind rapped at her windows once more, Ashley drew her dusty blanket up to her chin and tried to calm her thudding heart. She felt horrible making Tucker leave, but it was that doll. Something about it gnawed at her frayed nerves. Sleep did not come easy. Tucker didn't come for a few days. But when that knock came at her door again one night, she was ready. She took a deep breath. Come in, Tucker. He had it with him again. the husk of the doll looking even drier now, even more rancid. Ashley felt her heart roaring loudly in her ears again, agitation quickly pouring into a steady stream of anxiety. But she instead smiled. "Do you sleep with it, the doll?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, closing the door behind him, while Ashley lifted an old cloth bunny onto her lap. She had made it herself. Perhaps he would let the straw thing go. He just needed comfort. Miss Jessie kept me from having nightmares when I was younger. I think it would work better than that doll of yours." She smoothed the top of the worn bunny, offering it to Tucker as he came near. He stopped and clutched the husk doll closer, much to Ashley's dismay. She looked at him, the doll, and then at her bunny. Why? Why that doll? How could he find any comfort in it at all? There was something wrong. She felt it in the way goosebumps rose on her skin as he stood there. He wouldn't even sit next to her anymore. Her throat felt raw, her reddening eyes on that thing that had seemed to take Tucker captive and away from her. "Tucker, where did you get it?" She forced the words out, her hands going cold even under the heavy covers. "From Mom." "No," Ashley spoke through her teeth. "Mother did not give that to you." Her eyes softened like crumbling sand, the fear running deeper and deeper. "It had no face." Tucker, sweet Tucker, he had a face. But this doll, it had no face. So why did it glare at her, as if it saw her fears, her trembling hands? She had to get through to him. Somehow she would not let that thing take him. "Tuck," she said, her breath still uneven and her fingers still clammy as she reached to pick up her open book. "Why don't I read to you like before? Like she did whenever he had those dreams. Used to. Until this doll had come between them." She could see the hesitation in his eyes. Ashley sighed. "Tuck, I'm sorry, that doll. If it makes you feel better, then I have no right to take it from you." Even as she saw the life in his body dim and dim, all because of it. Her heart jumped as he sat down next to her, not bothering with the blankets. She smiled. Perhaps there was still hope, some minuscule speck or silver lining that meant he could still be okay, that he'd be free from the hold of that wretched doll. Ashley opened the book and began to read. Until he put the thing between them. A shock passed through her and the words in her book turned to mush. Breathing was suddenly an absurdity, something that she could not do. Her jaw grinded down on her teeth as she growled and flicked the doll away with the back of her hand. Her palm burned as if it were on fire, as if it were spreading and taking root in her veins, a shock so big that her voice came out like rotten milk, rancid and wailing. "Tucker, there's something wrong with that doll." But she could see him panic and try to reach for her. That thing, it was killing her brother. No, not while she was around. The hand that was burned curled around Tucker's shoulder, and she warned him, her gaze dark as the autumn storm outside those gold glass panes. She could still make it to him in time, right? This was her beloved brother. She had to. She had to. "Don't. It's malicious. It's trying to poison you, Tucker. Don't reach for it, please." Tucker looked back at her with an expression that could have been a knife to her stomach. His brown eyes were mute with pain, and his body shook. She looked at the doll. Ashley felt rage crawl up her neck. He grinned at her. What had this thing done to him? She would destroy it. She looked at the fireplace, low and burning steadily into embers. They were almost out of time. Ashley would not let this doll ruin everything. Tucker would be okay. She would do what she had to. A stifling groan struck her as she hit the floor. Her legs felt raw and cold, and the ground was wobbly. She fell to her knees and crawled to the doll, her pace slow from years of corrosion. Tucker watched, frozen, horrified. Its hold, she would break it. Ashley's hands reached over the doll, and the world seemed to melt into its old stench as she held it, her insides burning with decay, with intent. This doll meant to kill her. No. She would save them. The wind howled outside, and she cried out, her skin red from the doll's touch. It smiled with its faceless form, leering, scheming, She crushed it under her wilting hand and aimed for the fireplace, coughing as the fumes from her own burning wrist invaded her lungs, filling them with smoke so thick tears started running down from her eyes. She couldn't breathe, couldn't see, but she knew where the fireplace was. She knew because this was her room. This bedroom was hers. It had been hers for the longest time. No more. No more. She did not need air. All she needed was to throw the doll. Something stopped. Her heart. Her throat. Small, cold fingers pried it away, the doll. Her vision cleared. She gasped. Air. There was wind screaming outside of her room, and no air. Ashley looked up, her burnt hands setting fire to the floorboards below. Him, her brother, the doll in his hands, tears in his eyes, water running down his nose. Hey. Her words turned to coughs in her throat, like the walls around the room that stifled the life in them. He looked down and he said something, her eyes going hollow, the doll still smiling. She reached for him, but he was gone. She could see him running down the hall. Please, please, don't leave me here. Please, I want to help. Tucker heard her as he ran, the stench of blood mixing with fire and burnt crops. He held the doll closely and looked down at it. He heard hands thumping against the ground. She was behind him, but all he did was look at the doll. It was faceless. So why was it crying? Why was he crying? The fumes crawled down his eyes until he couldn't see, couldn't hear, could not breathe. He blinked. The small bed was damp with sweat. The sun was high in the sky, although the heavy curtains hid it. Tucker sat up, the cornhusk doll still on his nightstand. There was a knock at his door. It opened. Why aren't you up for school yet, Tuck? His mom looked at him. She sighed and went to sit by him. Did the doll Nana give you work? Tucker nodded. Then why are you crying, sweetheart? She wiped a tear away from the child's cheek. I didn't know it would hurt Ashley. Sweetheart, who's Ashley? Tucker, real name Tobias Winters, published this short story in a literary magazine back in 1996. I would have never found it if someone's sharp eye hadn't shown it to me. Though it was written as fiction, I had a feeling the story was an account of Tobias's own life. As mentioned by Ashley, the doll Tucker possessed was a cornhusk doll. Cornhusk dolls were used by Native people in North America for centuries. Their main purpose is to protect children from evil spirits. I decided to include this story to showcase that not all entries in this book are negative or malignant, as popular opinion likes to believe. I contacted Tobias Winters himself when I was putting this book together, and asked if I could include his story in this. Tobias, if you do see this, I know you won't ever admit that this happened to you. I've asked for years and years, and you've denied every time. I've always wanted to ask you if you denied this story because it made you feel guilty for Ashley, or whatever her name was in reality. If you do, stop. Spirits do not deserve your guilt. They are remnants of this world, bygone shadows. Leave them behind and do not look back, even if they are dear. And your doll, whether you still have it or not, did its job wonderfully. This concludes Chapter 3.